everything in an hour or two.
So the question, if you're just coming on, is what do you answer when a non-Jew asks, why do Jews keep kosher?
Where do we put it?
In the chat.
Oh, got it.
When I first joined my synagogue, I had a woman, a member of the congregation, come up to me and say, now, are you going to keep kosher? I don't. I just don't see the sense in it. And I had no idea what to say to her. I just stood there.
Each his own.
Yeah.
Maybe that's, isn't that what they say in Miracle on 34th Street? The whole point is it's about believing in things. It's about faith. So when things may not make sense. So.
Just getting on, the question is, what do you answer when a non-Jew asks why do Jews keep kosher? Please write
What do you answer when a non-Jew asks, why do Jews keep kosher?
No, that depends on which non-Jew is asking me. If it's a pastor, I have a different answer than a regular person.
Put them both in. A regular, but they're not regular people.
But a pastor should know,
Yeah.
It's called
because
Jew-baiting.
they study both the Old and the New Testament.
I hate that term, Old and New Testament.
All right, you putting your answers in on the chat?
Yeah, put them in on the chat.
I hope you're on mute, Molly.
How are you, Carol?
Good, how are you?
Okay.
Not too
Okay, I'm
bad.
writing tradition. Always did.
Who's talking?
Who's on? Do you think we'll be changing time?
Well, I'll mention it when everybody gets back on again.
Sounds fair enough.
The question that we're answering about kosher, is that the question?
Right,
Yeah.
you're answering, what do you answer when a non-Jew asks, why do Jews keep kosher?
Oh, I
Do you? Yeah.
didn't hear that part of the question. I'll change mine a little bit. Sorry.
Yeah, I could pin my, but maybe I'll stop my Zoom here, the other screen. So we still have a couple more people. I like that, Kay. My kitchen, my rules.
What would I say to her?
What would you say? Right, it's not asking you specifically because we didn't want to assume that everyone kept kosher. We know not everybody keeps kosher, so it's not why do you keep kosher? It's what would you say why Jews keep kosher in general? And I will repeat that one more time. So the question is, what do you say, how do you answer when a non-Jew asks, why do Jews keep kosher? And just go ahead and put that in the chat.
They shouldn't ask why do Jews keep kosher, because there's so many different ways. The way
Well, it's
one
not
might keep
how.
kosher is certainly not, I know I know you didn't ask, but I feel comfortable. Anybody can come into my house, but don't tell me, I'm not asking you to go out with me. And even when we go out, we'll eat fish and veggies and stuff, but I don't have to go to a kosher restaurant. But I know anybody can come into my house and eat.
Right, but that's
Yeah.
how you
Yeah,
keep kosher,
right,
not
right.
not
I answered
why.
right.
So
Just because.
gonna go ahead and get started because I see that Rabbi Fine is on. Hi. So let me just introduce our guest teacher for tonight. Rabbi David Fine is Rabbi of Temple Israel and Jewish Community Center in Ridgewood, New Jersey, adjunct professor of Jewish law at Zacharias Frankel Abraham Geiger Colleges in Potsdam. He's president of the North Jersey Board of Rabbis, serves on the Committee of Jewish Law and Standards. And you all have the rest of his bio, so trying to hit the key points. And we greatly appreciate you joining us tonight. I'm going to go ahead and put up the last prayer. If you'd like to start out by leading us in that, and I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody, so you may need to unmute.
Okay.
And I will share the screen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praise to you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has kept us alive, sustained us, and commanded us with the engagement of Torah study. Okay, study the words of Torah. Well, that was a close enough translation. There we go.
Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, and I'm honored to be with you this evening. I know the topic for tonight is kashrut, which we could spend a whole year just talking about kashrut. My thought was for the first half hour, I wanted to go through what are the biblical commands of kashrut from the Torah, and then the way it's developed in some of the key developments in the rabbinic law. Then we have our little break with a breakout period, and then after that, in the second half of the hour, I was going to focus on what are some of the specific questions of kashrut that the conservative movement has taken its own view on, looking at some of the different approaches to kashrut within conservative Judaism, and also I'll take a little time on the ethical kashrut questions. But I also want to be able to answer any questions that people have. So as I go through, I just put things in the chat if it's anything specific on what I'm saying, so then I can respond right then. And I also want to know what the different answers that came up with. The opening question was talking about how to explain kashrut to a non-Jew. I heard the very end of the conversation, kashrut is observed different ways across the board in the conservative movement. But then sometimes it's important to take aside and think about what does it look like from the outside, and how do we explain something that's so different from from that is just really from a Christian perspective. There's very little in Christian tradition that's equivalent to kashrut.
I think you won't be able to see the posts in the chat before you came on, so I can read through them when you.
Okay, great. I'm seeing it from now forward, but
Right.
It's only started when I got on. That's correct. That's correct. Okay, so I'm writing down a note about the parb question about chicken. That's a good question. Let's start with the biblical text. I wanted to put on the share the page from the handouts that were given with the biblical text. Can you either put that on or make me a co-host, and then I can put it on?
I made you a co-host.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, then I'm going to put that on the screen. Just give me 1 second to get that there. Okay, so this is taken from the middle of I'll get back to the first few sections, but what we have here, this first chunk of passage is from Leviticus, and it's basically from Parshat Shmini, is the key section of Leviticus where we have the laws of kashrut. Then they're repeated in Deuteronomy in Parshat Re'eh. So Shmini but especially shmini. When I have a bar bat mitzvah student that has shmini for the bar bat mitzvah, that's an easy thing for their Dvar Torah. Just talk about something about keeping kosher. Sometimes they come from a family that keeps kosher, sometimes they don't, but they always have something they can say about it and relate to it. This is from this passage from Leviticus 11. So these are the creatures that you may eat from among all the land animals. Any animal that has true hoofs and clefts through the hoofs and that chews the cud, you may eat. So that's the those are the two requirements for a kosher animal: a split hoof, so the hoof looks like this, right? And it chews its cud. So it's called a ruminant, like a cow, where you see the cow is always chewing. There's several different sections of the stomach. So the idea is the food first goes into the first section, and it comes back up in the esophagus, and the animal, the ruminant, which the cow continues to chew on it, and then it goes into the next section of the stomach as a part of the digestive process. So you need both characteristics in order for the animal to be kosher. It has to have a split hoof and it has to chew its cud. So animals that fall into that category are cows, obviously, goats, lambs, right? Those are the kosher animals. Not a horse, chew the cud, not a dog, not a cat, as they don't meet these specifications. The following, however, of those that either chew the cud or have true hoofs, you shall not eat. And then there's specifically, we're told we can't eat the camel. Although the camel chews its cud, it has no true hoofs. It is unclean for you. The hare, although it chews its cud, has no true hoofs. It is unclean. The swine, though the pig has true hoofs. Its hefts with the hoofs cleft, it doesn't chew its cud. So this is even sort of the Torah goes in, it goes into detail. It gives examples. It has one characteristic, not the other characteristic. And then the pig has the other characteristic, but not the first characteristic. So it's making sure that the reader understands the taxonomy of what a kosher animal is. So that's the section on the end.
It's a bit bigger. It's difficult to
Sorry?
read it. Is it possible to make the text a little bit bigger?
Sure.
Thank you. Amazing.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Sorry to interrupt.
That's easy for me to do. Okay, so now let's look at the next paragraph is about fish. You may eat all that live in the water, anything in the water, whether in the seas or in the streams, that has fins and scales, these you may eat. But anything in the seas or the streams that has no fins and scales, among all the swarming things of the water, among all the other living creatures that are in the water, they are an abomination for you, an abomination for you they shall remain. You shall not eat of their flesh. So what we call a normal fish, a fish that has fins and scales, like salmon, like haddock, like sole, it could be a freshwater fish, could be a saltwater fish. If it's a regular fish, it's kosher. But if it doesn't have scales, it's not kosher. So a shark doesn't have scales. It has gills, doesn't have scales. So that's why shark is not kosher. And certainly shellfish is not kosher. So there's a general category, shellfish are not kosher, because it doesn't have fins and scales, and those are what's called the swarming things of the water. So there are plenty of things that live in the sea that we're not allowed to eat, but all kinds of fish we're allowed to eat. So in general, when you're not sure if fish is kosher, you always say, go and eat shellfish. But if you want to know if the fish is kosher, you have to know does it have fins and scales. Now, sometimes and we'll get to the question of whether we can eat in a restaurant. If you eat a restaurant that's a kosher restaurant, you don't have to worry because you're trusting the kashrut that they know what to serve you. If you eat in a restaurant that's not kosher and are ordering fish, which, by the way, the Rabbinical Assembly has been saying we can do this for 70 years, you have to know which fish is kosher, which fish aren't kosher. So there are certain fish that it's not kosher. If you don't know, now it's easy. You can just type the name of the fish in your smartphone, press images, and you look at the picture, And you can see if it looks like a fish, it has fins and scales. You can also say, is this fish kosher? And Google will probably tell you. We call it Rabbi Google that way. And when 20 years ago, I used to, more than that now, I worked for the law committee for the Rabbinical Assembly. And one of my jobs was to answer questions whenever they came up, questions of Jewish law. Those were days before smartphones. And whenever we would get a question about is a certain fish kosher, and it was a fish that we didn't, some strange fish that we didn't know, we didn't have a tradition on. So we would call the Department of Ichthyology at the American Museum of Natural History in Manhattan. There was an ichthyologist who works there. Ichthyology is the study of fish. And then I would say, I'm calling about that, and I give some complicated name. I want to know if that fish, does it have fins and scales? And then the ichthyologist from the Natural History Museum would say, yes, it's kosher. So they knew why we were asking the question. So this is the law about fish. All right, now what about birds? All right, so I'm gonna have to, I had to close the video here. Okay, the following you shall abominate among the birds. Shall not be eaten, they are an abomination. The eagle, the vulture, the black vulture, the kite, falcons, ravens, ostrich, nighthawks, seagulls, hawks, little owl, cormorant, I don't know what that is, a great owl, a white owl, a pelican, the buster, the stork, herons of every type, the hoopoe, the bat. Now, a bat's not a bird, but okay, they treated it like a bird. Also, all animals that walk. Now, a bat's a mammal, by the way, but if it's a mammal, it's got to have a split hoof and chew its cud. The bat doesn't chew its cud. So we know the bat's not kosher. All animals that walk on paws, among those that walk on all fours, are unclean. Okay, so what we saw about the birds there is that there's a list of birds that aren't kosher. It doesn't tell us why. It's not like the animals where it gives us a formula that needs a split hoof and chew its cud, or the fish when it gives us a formula. It has to have fins and scales. Here it's just a list of birds. So technically, according to halacha, the bird is kosher if there's a tradition that it's kosher. Obviously, all of these birds are not kosher. But what we know is that what every bird in this list has in common is that they're birds of prey. So what that teaches us is that a bird of prey is not kosher. Although I know, chickens will eat anything, but basically birds of prey, not kosher. Fowl is kosher. So the kosher birds is chicken, a dove, a pigeon, although you wouldn't eat those because there's not a lot of meat on them, but they did offer those as sacrifices in the temple. Duck is kosher. Turkey is kosher, though there was a question about turkey because there was no tradition about turkey, because turkey is a New World bird. So some rabbis, when they first discovered turkeys, thought that turkey wasn't kosher, but it is, turkey is considered kosher. Now, among those things that swarm on the earth, anything that crawls on its belly, anything that walks on all fours, anything that has many legs, these are not kosher, right? Any kind of swarming thing. And then elsewhere that comes in the tradition, there's some locusts apparently are kosher. Thank God we don't eat locusts here, although in Mexico you can find them. There were traditions of which type were kosher and which weren't. Certainly a snake is not kosher, and people do eat snake, but it's not kosher. Yeah, I don't see the picture, but please, whoever was speaking, go ahead. No, okay. So these are the different categories we had to review. We have animals, we have fish, we have birds, and then we have the miscellaneous, I'll call it, which are the four categories according to Leviticus. I'm just going to want to just take a quick look at the chat here to see any questions that I want to get to. Okay. Okay, so I am going to cover cheese, so we will get to cheese. Deer can be kosher, venison. venison is deer meat is kosher, but you don't, and I have had it, so that can be kosher. The weight, we'll get to the meat and milk mixing in a minute, so we'll cover that before the end. Yeah, the bottom feeders are the ones that we don't eat with fish. We will get to swordfish. I will speak about swordfish. Sturgeon, I don't believe is kosher. Okay, yeah, we will talk about swordfish. I wouldn't eat a cicada, but let's just listen to them. It's enough. Pheasant is kosher. Yes, can be kosher. So, okay, so those are wonderful questions. I want to look at what else. There's one other line here from Leviticus 22. This has to do with slaughtering. No animal from the herd or from the flock shall be slaughtered on the same day with its young. That's a special mitzvah from the Torah. It's called the Mitzvah of Ottow ve'et beno, it and its young. That you can't kill both can't slaughter, I shouldn't say kill, can't slaughter both on the same day. What's interesting, you'll notice, is that it doesn't say anything about slaughtering the animals in general. It doesn't say anything in the Torah about shechita, about kosher slaughter. So I don't know if anyone was thinking when I mentioned cow, venison, beef, venison, lamb, it's kosher. Well, not all of it's kosher. It has to be kosher meat. It's not enough that it's from the kosher animal. So, but that's not from the Torah. That's developed later. The other thing that I want to go back to here, we have 3 times in the Torah, you shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. This law applies 3 times. So we'll get to that. And then the last section I want to show you is this part from Leviticus 17. This is the last, and then I'll take off the screen share. If anyone in the house of Israel, the strangers who reside among them, partakes of any blood, I'll set my face against the person who partakes the blood, cut him off from among the people. It's bad. No person shall partake of blood. So we have a rule that we can't eat blood, and we have a rule that we can't boil a kid in its mother's milk. So, okay. Those are the passages from the Torah.
Rav Google said that sturgeon is not kosher.
Okay, good. And Rav Google agrees with me. I'm glad to hear. So that's what we have from the Torah. Now, eggs and blood spots. Yes, the rule with an egg is that if it has a blood spot in the egg, if you open the egg and it's a blood spot, then we don't eat it because we don't have anything with blood in it. It's rare, very, very rare, especially with industrial produced eggs, that you'll find a blood spot. If you open it, there's a blood spot, you just throw it out. Is all that you do with the egg in those circumstances. So we're going to go now from the Bible to move to the rabbinic part. So the first thing I want to focus on is don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. All that says is you can't cook it. Now, technically, it's just an animal in its mother's milk. But even if we interpret it as any meat in mixture with any milk mixture, the only thing the Torah says is you can't cook it together. But it appears 3 times in the Torah. So this is an example of what we call Midrash halacha, where the rabbis will draw out from the Torah, and that's what Midrash means. And they're going to learn laws from the Torah that are not there on the face and not in the context. The Torah is just saying you don't boil the kid in its mother's milk. But because it appears 3 times in the Talmud, they decide that that means there's 3 laws. One is that you can't cook any type of meat with any type of milk, any dairy. And the second law is that you can't eat milk and dairy together, even if it wasn't cooked together, right? Why not just take a slice of cold roast beef and a slice of cheese and then cook it together? It's cold sandwich. Can't do that. And the third thing is what is any benefit from it. So cooking is called bishul, eating is achila, and benefit is called hana'ah. Can't have any benefit. I can't mix it together and serve it to someone else. Can't even give it to my dog because that'll make me happy because my dog is happy. I don't have a dog, it's a fantasy. But so this is an example of how the whole idea of the mixture of meat and milk is all derived from that one verse. It's not at all clear from the Torah, but it's how rabbinic law develops. So one of the ways that rabbinic law developed is that the flavors from one to the other transfer at high temperatures. And the high temperature is understood in the halacha. They use a phrase called yad soledet bo, which means your hand will jump back. So if there's a pot, if you touch the pot, and if you reflexively pull your hand back from the pot, that's hot enough. That's what's called yad soledet bo. And if it's that heat that gets that hot, that means that the meat and the milk mix with each other and they can't be unmixed. And that's when the thing that's cooked together becomes unkosher and you can't have it. So that's what's learned from that. And because of that, that's why we have to have we're supposed to have separate pots and pans, the milchik set and the fleishik set, the milk set and the meat set. Now, you might say, well, it's only the ingredients. What is it, the difference of the pan? Because the ayah says is not only will the flavor from the milk thing and the meat thing mix, but the flavor also goes from the food into the container of the pot. Now, they didn't, you say, what if I wash my dishes, I scour it, I put it in the dishwasher. They didn't do that in ancient times. They must have kept more things along the pot, whatever. But the understanding is the pot absorbs, especially if you understand they're using clay pots. It absorbs the flavor. Now, if 24 hours have passed, then the halacha has an assumption, it's called notain tam lifgam. That means it gives a bad taste. So whatever taste was there in the pot isn't a good taste if it's 24 hours old. So we're still not allowed to do it, but if we did do it, it's not the end, it doesn't ruin it, doesn't make a treif. So what that means is that if you're cooking a meat stew in a pot, and all of a sudden you said, "Oy gewalt, it's my milchik pot. What do I do?" So you call the rabbi, and the question the rabbi is going to ask is, when's the last time you used the pot for something milchik, for a dairy thing? You said, "Oh, it was last week." Then the rabbi says, "Okay, don't worry about it. Pour it in a nice clean Tupperware. Then you can serve it with your Shabbos meal. Clean the pot carefully, kosher it. You're fine. Nothing to worry about." But if the pot had been used in 24 hours, then you would have to throw out the container for dairy, and then you cooked meat in it. Then you have to throw it out, unfortunately, and you still kosher the pot. So it's called a distinction halakha between I'm not supposed to do it. It's like we're not supposed to switch. So now 24 hours here and there. But if we did do it, we have to know when after the fact it's still okay. I don't have to throw it out. And this was the stuff that was the most important thing for rabbis to learn, because they had to learn how to answer the questions. And there's a lot of ways the rabbis can find a way to say, no, it's kosher. You don't have to throw out the food, because we all know we're not supposed to waste food. So this is the huge volumes of halakha that go into this area. Now you might say, if the treifness, right, the non-kosher only mixes when it's hot, then I understand why I have to have separate pots for meat and milk, but why do I have to have separate dishes? You could say, well, the soup is hot. Okay, it's a soup bowl, but what if it's just the plate? So the answer is, it's not as critical as the pots, but we're supposed to have separate dishes because this is what we call making a fence around the Torah. It's a protective measure so we don't make a mistake. If you accidentally put the meat stuff on the milchik dish or the milk stuff on the meat dish, it's okay. I mean, switch it to the other dish, but it doesn't mean that the food is not kosher and we don't have to go crazy. So that's, again, there's levels of when something becomes treif and when it's otherwise okay. So all of that's learned from those three things about the mixing meat and milk. I'm going to take a quick look at the chat here. How do I properly cleanse hands and the different dishes, utensils? Okay, our hands, just clean them, but the koshering, the utensils and the pots is an important question in terms of how do you make it kosher if it wasn't, right? So, and if par food is in a meat pot, Right, I do a quick answer to that. If the par food is cooked in a meat pot, it doesn't become meat unless the pot was used in the last 24 hours. However, you're not supposed to serve it then on if it was on the other thing. If you cooked it in a meat pot, you should serve it on meat dishes. It's not fleshik, but you're supposed to keep it to the same, the same denomination. And do trivets or cutting boards matter? We keep separate cutting boards in my house. I have a red one that's for meat and the white one is for dairy. The reason to keep the cutting board separate is that the halacha is very concerned with knives, that when you're slicing something with a knife, you get the things on it. So even though it's not being cooked, the idea is that when you're carving something, whatever it is, if you're carving meat or if you're carving cheese, it's going to be there in the knife and then it's going to embed itself in the cutting board. So that's why it's good to have different cutting boards.
I meant for the cutting board, if you're putting hot meat dishes on a wood cutting board versus a hot dairy dish on a wood cutting board. If you're only using it to put the hot things on. My
you mean
grandmother
just-
used to have like everything separate.
Yeah.
Can you use the same wooden cutting board just as a trivet to put a hot
If
pot
you're
on and
using
put
it
the
as a
hot-
trivet, it's fine. If you're using it as an actual cutting board, then you want to keep it separate. Yeah, then you want to keep it separate. So quick thing about the koshering. So koshering, when you switch it from meat to milk, milk to meat, or from chumetz to pesadik, pastor to chumetz, none of that's in the Torah. But that's all rabbinic law. The basic rule is it's how you use it. So if it's metal, then you boil it, and boiling will kosher it. If it's in the oven, if it's used for baking in the oven, then the oven's got to glow. So you kosher an oven with a self-clean, or you take a blowtorch. It's not easy to do. Glass is easy to kosher, though there's different opinions because it's all smooth. The smoother it is, the non-porous, the easier it is to make it kosher. If it's porous, if it's china, if it's wooden, clay, then it's harder because the concern is that it absorbs the taste, the offending taste. So that's the basic rule there about koshering. So before we take the break in a minute, but a word about shechita. Shechita is slaughtering. Okay, it's good to know. You should know that the founder of Women's League for Conservative Judaism was Matilda Schechter. Her name was Schechter because she was married to Solomon Schechter, whose father was a shochet. So that's what Schechter meant. And just a little tidbit: when World War I broke out, and Solomon Schechter was very pro-English. Got into a little trouble with the JTS board because they were pro-German, a lot of German Jews there. But Schechter was so pro-English and so anti-German, and he knew Schechter is a German-sounding name. So he said in 1914, he said, "My next book is going to be by Professor Butcher." That's a joke. Okay, so what is shechting? Nothing about that in the Torah, but it's the special requirements for how we slaughter kosher animal. There's no requirement for shechting fish. So the big difference between fish on the one hand and birds and animals on the other hand is that the fish don't have to be shechted. It doesn't matter, which is good, because otherwise that would be very hard to find kosher fish. Usually the fishermen catch it and they just, they're on and then we eat them, right? But birds and mammals that are kosher, that are potentially kosher. So first of all, it has to be from a kosher animal, a kosher bird, but then we have to shecht it in a special way. And this is what's technically called secular slaughter, because in the Torah, it says that you would bring your animal to the temple. The priests would offer it on the altar as a sacrifice and would give you your portion, would keep the portions for the priests and give you the portions for you to take home. That's what everyone did on Passover for Erev Pesach. They would bring the lamb up to the temple, the lamb would be shechted, and then they would cut up the lamb, they would give you your piece home, you take it home, you roast it, you have it for the Seder. But there's this passage in the book of Deuteronomy where it says, if you want to have meat where you are, then you can have you slaughter it where you are if you can't bring it to the temple. So the rabbi says, slaughter it. There must be a special rule about how to do that. And all the rules are derived in the rabbinic law. The basic idea of the laws of shechting, there are, first, there's the idea the animal cannot have died from it has to be healthy before you shecht it. Right? It can't be dying from a wound. That's what's literally treif means if the animal is torn. It can't be a diseased animal. And then the shechting of the animal is a cutting the front of the neck where you make an incision through the esophagus and the windpipe and the food pipe. And that causes and I'm sorry if it's a little graphic, I'm not going to demonstrate, don't worry. Causes the blood to fall out. So the idea is that the animal basically faints. And it limits the harm. And part of the rules about this is that the laws of kashrut are obsessed with the sharpness of the knife, that you want the knife to be incredibly sharp. And the reason why you want the knife to be incredibly sharp is that way, the sharper the knife is, the less pain the animal feels. And the way to think about it is you think about a razor blade, right? That it's the sharp razor blades don't hurt. If the laser blade is nicked and old, that's when it cuts into the skin. And so I'll show you, I have a shechting knife here because I learned how to shecht birds. And I can, wrong bag, sorry, right over here. And the knife for shechting a cow is the same, it looks the same, it's just bigger because obviously the cow's neck is bigger than a bird's neck. So this is my shechting knife. I'm taking it out here, and that's what it looks like. All right, so it's just a flat knife. And what it comes is what we learn how to do when you shecht is you have to, in order to make it sharp, is we stone sharpen it. So I have 3 stones of coarse and then medium and then finer. And it's so wet, we would wet the stone. And then I go like this, back and forth against the stone. And you have to do that to prepare the knife for shechting. And then there's a method to determine that it has no nicks. The method is that you take your fingernail and you bring it up the side, up and down the side, across on the other side of the blade. And then with the fingernail, if you can feel where there's a little bit, a little nick, and you can feel that with the fingernail, like I can feel a little nick there. And then if you feel the nick, then you have to keep sharpening it, and then you test it again with your fingernail to make sure that it's no nick. The test that you have in order to become a shochet is your teacher will go like this, make a nick, and you're not noting where the nick is. Then I had to go with my fingernail and find the spot in the knife where the nick was that he put there, and then sharpen it and eliminate the nick. So that's a skill, a very technical skill that a shochet uses. The other technical skill is then how to slice it, and then it checks the bird. So that's what shechita is. And there's a bracha to say, just like we said the bracha lasog b'vrei Torah. The bracha is a sheker tamid avesivanu al hashchita, who has commanded me regarding the shechita. And then there's there's laws that you're not supposed to go all the way to the bone because then that'll nick the knife. And then after you do the shechita with the bird, then you're supposed to bury the blood, which for me is the most powerful, beautiful thing. And it reminds the care that we take, right, with the knife and with burying the blood. I do believe that it's to show that we understand that this is the way of the world. If we want to be vegetarian, that's fine. But if not, there's a proper way to slaughter an animal, then we still respect it and we respect its blood as its life force. And we actually bear, the blood is covered. So that's involved there in the laws of the shechita. And the one last thing, and then we'll take the break and I'll check the questions, is that the Torah said don't eat blood. Didn't specify that. So after you do the shechting, what we do is there's two things that are done before the meat of the bird or the meat or the beef can become kosher, and that it's soaking and salting, right? That you have to soak it in. Kosher salt is the coarse salt. The reason you have kosher salt and it sits for several hours in the kosher salt, you put it on the salt, then you rinse the salt off, and then you soak it. So the salting and the soaking draws the liquid, which is the blood, out of the animal, because we want to take the blood out. Most of the blood's going to pour out after the shechita, right? Because I check the animal and the blood's going to pour out. But whatever doesn't pour out, we remove it through the soaking and through the salting and the soaking, unless you're grilling the meat. If you're grilling the meat on a grill, you don't have to soak and salt. And the idea is because the blood is going to fall down through the grill. The time you have to soak and salt is if you're not grilling, if you're putting the meat in a stew or you're roasting it in a pot, then whatever juice is in there is going to cook in its juices. So that's why you have to remove the excess blood through the soaking and salting. Some kosher butchers will say not soaked and salted, soaked and salted. Other kosher butchers have everything soaked and salted. You have to make a special request not to have it soaked and salted. Right. If you're not grilling, let the butcher do it so you don't have to do it. So some do it all the time because they don't want, because people think, oh, I bought this from a kosher butcher, it's kosher. It's not kosher yet if it's not soaked and salted. But if you're grilling, it's better it's not soaked and salted because it's going to be less dry and salty. It's going to taste better. And there's not a requirement to do it if you're putting it on the grill. Okay, so I've been talking, we went through a lot of details. In the second half, I want to answer the questions, talk about conservative practice. So if you didn't, we'll take we take 10 minutes for the breakout. And in addition to the opening question on how we explain why we keep kosher, say also, if you didn't put something into the chat, you talk about what other questions, and I'll make sure I see that. And the other thing to talk about is the first question was from an outside perspective, how do we explain keeping kosher? So now think of from the perspective of being a conservative Jew, what is the most challenging part of being kosher? What's the most challenging issue? And I'd be interested in seeing what so put some of those responses in the chat also. And since the time is now quarter, maybe if we can resume then at in 10 minutes. Okay.
Yeah, I have it set for 10 minutes and then they'll end.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay,
thanks.
I'm going to go ahead and start
Right.
it up.
Okay. Are most of us back? Did you have a good discussion?
Yes.
I don't think we answered the questions, but we had a nice chat.
That's okay. Just to be talking about it, it's interesting.
I think everybody's
Okay.
back.
Thank you. So Joe, we go until 9:15. Is that the plan? Wonderful.
Yep.
Okay. So, and interesting, now we do have the old chats here. Okay, so I will go through there and try to get some of the questions, but I want to focus on the conservative movement's approach to some of these issues. So the first thing I want to show you, and this is on a, it's good for you to know this, it gets more technical, but I'm going to show you something on the share screen. Let me first prepare the right level there. Here we go. Hold on. Screen, share screen. Okay. So if you go to rabbinical.assembly.org, which is the website of the Rabbinical Assembly, and then you want to know, like, what does the law committee say about something? So under practical rabbinics, there's a page here for the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards. And if you click that, we have here all of the chuvot of the law committee, the responsa that the law committee, which just answers question of Jewish law for the conservative movement from 1980 until the present. It has everything from 1980. At some point, we'll put the earlier papers on it. We have to digitalize those, but everything from 1980 is there, and also papers from Israel. They're divided into 4 sections: Orach Chaim, Yoreh Deah, Even Ezer, and Choshen Mishpat, because those are the 4 divisions of the Shulchan Aruch. But I think there's a site, if you search in the search site and look for something, you'll probably find what you're looking for. Laws of kashrut are in the Yoreh Deah section. You open that up, it gives you all the different, I could click this and it'll go right to kosher slaughter. And these are all the chuvot, shackling and hoisting, veal. We had a paper, and you pick any paper. If you click it, then you have the tshuva here. It tells you who voted for it. This was a 9-5 vote, so it was close, but it was on the issue of veal. The question of veal is that, yes, veal is kosher. It's a baby calf. It's got a split hoof. It chews its cud. It's shechted by a kosher shoichet. But the problem is that the veal is a baby calf that's kept in a pen that can't move and is basically starved, which is very cruel, the treatment of the baby calf, which is how veal is made. That's why it's so lean. So the argument is that we should not eat veal because of the cruelty in which the animal is treated, which is not the case with beef, because the cow can go and roam and enjoy the ranch until the day of shechita comes along. So that's, for example, and then there's a difference of opinion. You have but that's why it was a split decision. We were talking in my group about Hebrew National. One of the questions with Hebrew National is that they do an electric stunning sometimes in some of their plants, where the animal's given an electric shock before the shochet comes with the shechting knife. This way it makes the animal unconscious, which makes things easier for the shochet, right? Question is whether that affects the validity of the shechita, of the kosher slaughter. Rabbi Rabinowitz argued that it's okay. And that's what that tshuva is about there. We have a issue of, here, some other technical questions here, microbial enzymes, and then it's deal with dishwashers, pizza, and other stuff in a non-kosher restaurant. So I'm going to get back to that. We were talking about wine. The real issue with wine is that wine was not considered kosher in the rabbinic times because they're living in the Hellenistic times. And when the Greeks and the Romans, when they prepared wine, they would always make a libation to Dionysus, to Bacchus. This is the god of the vine. And there's a law in Judaism that if anything is used for idolatry, then we can't touch it. So if this keg or vat of wine, if they took and made a libation out of it, then I can't drink from it. So the argument here that Rabbi Dorff made in 1985 is that people that prepare wine today, whether it's in California or France, they're not making libations to Dionysus today. So therefore, we don't have to worry about, whether the wine is kosher. There's no ingredient in the wine that's not kosher. So we can drink any wine that we want. There have been some newer arguments, and in my group mentioned that in the book. There's concerns about some red wines that they may use that the additive that's added to maintain the nice red color of the wine might have something that's not kosher in the ingredient that's added, in the additive. So that's the issue with some red wines. And then the question is whether that's something that we need to be concerned about, which I'm going to come to later. So these are questions there of kashrut. If you're talking about koshering something, the laws of koshering are actually not found where the laws of keeping kosher are. The laws of koshering is in the laws of Passover. There's an Orach Chaim, Pesach and koshering. Can you kosher a microwave? How do you supervision for Passover? Supervision of synagogues for kashrut. The reason why koshering is in the laws of Passover is because, and I'm going to end the stop share screen there, is because in the olden times, the time that you had the kosher stuff is when you're making your kitchen from Kumitzik to Pesadik. Today, koshering is more often done when someone who's not kosher decides to make their kitchen kosher. But that didn't happen in medieval times. Medieval times, all Jews kept kosher. So that was far less common, right? They get the kosher everything going in the Passover. We often don't. All I have to do is dig out of my basement my Passover boxes. And there I got my Passover set. So we have so much space and we have so many things that we can have a special Pesach stuff. So I don't have to kosher stuff as much as I did then. So that's just where the koshering law. So I wanted to show you where those responses are. They're available to the public. It's something I'm particularly proud of because I was the staff person at the RA when we first did that, and back to 22 years ago, it was a long time already, and I continue to be involved in that process. Yeah, the thing about lab-grown meat is very interesting, and that's a very interesting question, whether that's to be considered fleishik or not. Are some parts of the cow kosher and some not? Yes, so one of the laws that I didn't show you from the Torah is when Jacob struggles with the angel the night before he goes to reconcile with his brother Esau, he then the angel hurts his sciatic nerve. It must have been that Jacob suffered from sciatica, and he told the story that he fought with an angel. That way he didn't have to pretend he was just had sciatica. That's my interpretation of that. Anyway, from that, it's a requirement to remove the sciatic nerve from the hindquart, it's the hind leg of the animal, to remember, because it says in the Torah, that's why Israelites don't eat the sciatic nerve. And this is a difference of Sephardic and Ashkenazic custom. In the Ashkenazic tradition is we don't know how to remove the sciatic nerve. Deveining is a very difficult thing, even deveining. We don't remove the nerve, we just don't eat the hindquarter. So if you want real Chateaubriand, which comes from the hindquarter, you got to go to like an authentic Sephardic, I don't think any in this country, but I think there are places in France that you can get it. So in Ashkenazic Shechita, the hindquarters are just sold to the non-Jewish part of the slaughterhouse operation. So that's the part that we don't eat the sciatic nerve. We don't eat any of the blood, also. So that's removed. Okay, so let me let me say a word about swordfish. I know that came up a few places in the chat. I love swordfish. That's my favorite fish. The Rabbi Isaac Klein, you're the conservative rabbi, said swordfish is kosher. His paper is not on our website, but it is readily available. The question is, remember with fish, it has to have fins and scales. So the swordfish, when it's young, has scales. But when the swordfish matures, it sheds its scales, and then it's completely smooth, like a shark. And we know shark is not kosher. So the question is the swordfish a scaled fish, or is it not a scaled fish? Now, when you buy the swordfish from the fish market, and usually don't buy a whole swordfish because it's such a huge fish. That's why it's cut into steaks, and you buy a swordfish steak. It's a huge fish. But if you look at the swordfish, it's a huge fish, and there's no scales. Because if you're the fisherman and if you fish out of the water an immature swordfish, you throw it back in the water because it doesn't have enough meat on it. You're only going to take back the fish, and you're only going to sell to the market the fish that's got a lot of meat on it, which is a fully matured swordfish. And a fully matured swordfish does not have scales. So the question is, does that make it a scaled fish or not a scaled fish? The Orthodox don't eat swordfish because they say if you have it, doesn't have scales. Isaac Klein investigated, he consulted with ichthyologists who told him, yes, it is classified as a scaled fish. The way that I always understand it is, this I'm not insulting anyone because it's really about men. Male, this is a women's class. I compare it to male pattern baldness. My two brothers are younger than me, are bald. I'm the only one, the three of us that kept my hair, although it's still thinning a little bit on the sides. So adult males, we lose the hair, but it doesn't mean that we're not considered haired animals. Swordfish loses the scales, doesn't mean it's not a scaled animal. So that's the analogy. Isaac Klein doesn't make that art. That's my analogy. So that's the deal with swordfish. Okay, we talked about wine. And the other thing is, someone mentioned gelatin and cheese. So the issue with cheese is the rennet. And the rennet is the curdling agent, what turns the milk into cheese. Right? So the curdling agent, the rennet, is an enzyme. It's a stomach that's taken from the stomach of the cow. And the farmer, when they would make homemade cheese, they would actually keep the stomach of the cows that they shechted, and they would put the milk in there, and then that would curdle it. It makes sense because the enzyme, it's the digestion. That's why there are enzymes in the stomach. That's the stomach's job, right? So the question is, if it comes from the stomach, then that's a mixture. What if it's not shechted? It's a mixture of meat, milk. So there are other ways of curdling that don't use the stomach enzyme. But Rabbi Klein argued, the same Isaac Klein who wrote this classic paper from, I think it was 1979 or 78, he made two arguments. He said that when cheese is prepared, certainly in our country following FDA standards, it's so carefully processed that it's the enzyme, they derive it from the stomach, it's chemically processed, goes through a lab, that once they make the rennet, it's gone through chemical changes, that it no longer has the identity that it had when it came out of the stomach of the cow. So we use the term in Hebrew, davar chadash, which is the principle that he invented, a brilliant idea. It means the new thing, davar chadash. It's a new thing. It's no longer what it was. Change its identity. A lot of conservative rabbis have started to question this because there's so many, as food production is so complicated, so many other, you can apply this to so many cases. But that was his argument. The other argument he said is that in order for something to be kosher, it has to be considered food. Something that's not food is not treif. So what's the definition of food? Would a dog eat it? So he said if you took a test tube of the rennets, that is lab prepared rennet that they're going to curdle, if you put it in front of a dog, the dog's not going to eat it. The dog's not going to eat it. It's not considered food. It's not considered food. It's not treif, so it doesn't make the cheese not kosher. That's the second argument. Those are the arguments with the cheese. He had another famous paper about gelatin. Is the same argument. Gelatin, the gelling agent is taken from bone marrow. Right? He said the same thing. It's a davar chadash, and it's not considered food in itself, even though people do suck on the bone marrow. But when it's taken to make the gelatin, it goes through a different. His other argument is kosher gelatin is made the same way, so it doesn't. So that's swordfish. That's cheese, rennet. We talked about wine. I bet my dog would eat rennet. Okay, well, Sharon's dog must be very hungry.
Can you talk about the time, the waiting, 6 hours, 3 hours?
Let me say a word about that, and then I'm going to talk about parv and then eating in a kosher restaurant. So the reason why you have to wait more after meat than after milk is because meat lingers. So think about eating lamb. You're eating lamb, the meat, food gets stuck in your teeth. And when you're digesting it, and now you taste it still, right? That's why, by the way, in the Seder, the last thing we eat is the Afikoman. And there's a special law that you're not allowed to eat anything at the Afikoman, the end of the Seder. The reason for that, and it's matzah, but in the ancient times, the Afikoman was a last piece of lamb. So if you think about it as a piece of the Pesach lamb, the law makes sense, because usually you would always eat dessert after lamb because nobody wants to keep tasting the lamb and it keeps coming up. You know? So, but at the Seder, at Passover, that's the mitzvah. So let that be the last thing. So after dessert, you then take another piece of lamb. That's the law of the Afikoman. So because the meat lingers, that's why you want to wait, because even if I finished eating meat, it's still there in my body and I'm still going to, and it's going to mix. That's the idea. Whereas after dairy, the dairy goes down faster. Some say after cheese, you should wait a half hour, but it's not the same as after the meat. There are difference of opinions how long to wait after meat. Very common in the conservative movement is 3 hours. Some customs is 6 hours. Some customs 1.5 hours. Those customs vary. But it's you eat meat. The idea is wait the amount of time it takes that it's not there in it's not there anymore. You know, so I grew up, we wait 2.5 hours in my family, but it's at least an hour basically is fulfilling it until wait, and that's why we wouldn't serve dairy dessert after a meat meal. So the big question is eating, and because different people observe in different ways, right? There's different, we call it levels of kashrut, right? So there's kosher style. Kosher style is no pork. Kosher style is no swordfish. Kosher style is I'm not mixing meat and milk. So, you know, there are people that will go in a restaurant, they'll order chicken, but no butter sauce, you know. So that's the first level. Because I won't eat, so I'll eat a hamburger, not me, like one. Yeah, I'll eat a hamburger at McDonald's, but not a cheeseburger, and not a bacon cheeseburger. So that's one level. Then the other level, which is the meat has to be kosher meat. That's harder to do, right? Because kosher meat does taste a little bit different if it's salted and soaked and salted, right? But otherwise, that's more subtle, that observance, because it looks the same and it basically tastes the same. And then there's the question of it having been cooked separately. So you go to a restaurant, it's not always mashkiach is the one who's doing the supervision of the restaurant, right? And sometimes it has a supervisor, sometimes it doesn't have a sometimes the mashkiach comes in once a week and just checks things out. So that's also how much level of supervision do you require? So there's a famous tshuva of the law committee from 1950s by a late Rabbi Max Artz, who says you can eat fish in a non-kosher restaurant. His reasoning is that nobody who cooks fish would ever cook the fish on the same grill, same part of the grill and the same pots as they're cooking meat. Why? Because the fish are going to ruin the taste of the meat. I made this mistake once. It's like a mistake you make only once. I was grilling for a barbecue and we were grilling a salmon, and then I put some burgers, and I put the burgers in the same part of the grill where I had the salmon. The hamburgers tasted like fish. It was ruined. It was no good. So it's like a mistake I'd only make once, never make, you learn. You never make the same mistake again. That was what Rabbi Artz argued. If they one time did it, they would never intend to do it. It would be an accident. And there's a basic rule in kashrut. It's called the rule of batel b'shishim, which means nullification by 1/60th. This is another rule rabbis have to say, oh my God, Rabbi, I ruined my whole dinner. I put this into that and that into this. So if the offending mixture is 1/60th or less, right? You are cooking the beef stew, and I have the bottle for my baby that I'm holding in my left hand while I'm cooking the stew in the right hand, and I'm focusing on not dropping the baby on the stove. And then instead the baby had the bottle, and then a few drops of the milk of the bottle fell into the stove of the meat. Oh no. So then the rabbi says, well, how many drops fell in? It's probably less than 1/60th, so it's still kosher. You can't put in 1/70th and put it in as a part of your recipe, right? But you say 1/60th, and at 1/60th, it's nullified. The reason why we're so obsessed with kosher for Passover, the law of 1/60th doesn't apply on Passover. On Passover, it has to be completely Pesach. But the rest of the year, if something came that wasn't supposed to be there, if it's less than a 60th, it's okay. Where do we get to 1/60th? From here, from an analog. They think about 60 minutes in an hour, 60 seconds. So 1/60th is one part of the whole, and it's nullified. So that's the rule of 1/60th. So those in the conservative movement who eat in non-kosher restaurants, we call it eating hot dairy out, is the big question. The law committee has never written a paper on this. They've tried. There have been papers that they've discussed that still haven't passed. I wrote an argument about it in my book, Passionate Centrism, the United Synagogue published, which I think is the only place a conservative rabbi actually published it. But it is the vast majority observed across the board. The argument is, when I order in a restaurant, I'm looking at the menu. I know the things I can't eat. I know the things I can eat. If I order soup, I have to ask the waiter, it's not a beef stock, right? It's not a chicken stock, right? It's just a vegetarian stock for the soup. No shellfish, and you order it. If something in the way it was cooked by accident, was it cooked together in the same pot? I don't know. I wasn't in the kitchen. If it happened, it was probably less than a 60th. So and then we talked about in my group, we said a problem with kosher is because it's too expensive. Right? This way, it's possible to travel. It's possible to go restaurant business. It makes it more livable. And this is why this is the widespread custom in many in the conservative movement to eat in hot dairy out in terms of making keeping kosher more accessible. It's not across the board. There are many conservative Jews who will not do that and will only eat in kosher restaurants. But that's it's also a question of also eating in other people's homes, right? Whether you trust someone's kashrut or not. And it's a similar question. One thing I don't want to miss that I saw in the question was parv and chicken. So this whole issue of parv, right? A bird is not an animal. It's actually closer to a fish than a mammal. So if a fish is parv, why isn't a bird parv? Well, a bird gets shechted like an animal. The fish doesn't get shechted. But technically, the animal is not meat, right? Even though we say the chicken has meat. So the technical answer to that is, according to Torah law, the bird meat is parv, but the rabbinic law, it's treated as if it's meat. And the idea is because you would confuse it. One thing I mentioned veal, and when that tshuva was passed, I stopped eating veal. But a veal cutlet and a chicken cutlet's almost very difficult to tell the difference, especially if it's deep fried, in the breading. So the idea is you would confuse if a dark meat chicken you could confuse with very light meat beef, and so that you don't confuse. Whereas fish, you're not going to confuse the fish. The fish is a different color, and that's why we treat bird meat as if it's real meat. And we treat it as if it's fleshik, not as if it's parv. We're just about out of time. I'm going to take a quick look at the chat to see if there's anything else that I should address. I know there's so many different things that we, and I'm sorry, it's a run through. It's so many things in kashrut.
I will say, with all the fake products out there, that appearance thing. I was at a vegan restaurant and had a bacon cheeseburger with fake bacon, fake cheese, and fake burger. So, somebody looking in the window would think that's what I was eating.
Yeah, so there's so many, right? And you can have the, it's true, and it looks like, and now with the, you can go to any Dunkin' Donuts now and order an egg and the fake sausage. What's it called? The
Beyond sausage.
You can go to Burger King now and order an Impossible Whopper with cheese on it. And technically, I mean, yeah, you still have the issue that it's cooked on a grill, you know, and in a next to non-kosher things. So there's still things that if you, you know, if you're strict, then you don't do it. And if you're lenient that you eat out, you don't think about that too much. But yes, this is a new, it doesn't seem kosher, but those developments are, and you know, you still, well, sometimes, I mean, they're getting better and better at the fake quality of it. And there's a lot of arguments in favor of eating that plant-based, that it's healthier and also better for the environment, right? Because the amount of land that a cow takes up, right, is and you have to cut down trees and make grasslands for cows. It's a sustainability issue for the amount of beef that humans consume. So there is also a very important ecological reason for eating the plant-based meats, which also I should say a word about also the ethical kashrut issues, the slaughter issues, right? Where there was a problem about 15 years ago with a kosher slaughterhouse that was, there was terrible cruelty both towards the animals and the workers. And there was an effort in the conservative movement to have it was supposed to be called the Magen Tzedek, a justice seal, to show that they're, you know, we did the proper, to make sure that the workers were ethically cared for and the animals were ethically cared for. It doesn't affect the kashrut, but those are also Jewish laws, that we're not allowed to abuse workers and we're not allowed to cause suffering to animals. That's called Sar Bali Chaim. And we should, if we know that there is a producer that is violating those things, then we should not buy from that producer. It ended up being too complicated and never worked out for conservative movement to do that because there's so many liability issues, and we just didn't have the resources to do a full investigation of every producer to determine whether it reached our standards or not, because we would have to be prepared for, you know, libel suits and all of those things. So there's the economics fit in. But one of the issues with Hebrew National, which is a more modern plant, I've always said by Hebrew National, we don't need the glot. The glot standard is not a requirement of the halacha. It is when the shochet slaughters the animal, you do sort of a post-mortem operation to make sure the animal is healthy. Basically, in a word, what glot means is any question, you put it aside. Whereas halachically, the shochet knows, oh, but this is kosher, this is not kosher. Glot means I don't trust the shochet to make that decision. So Hebrew National, which is not glot, is also much more affordable, and we should make it easier for people to keep kosher, not harder for people to keep kosher. One thing about eating fish, it's customary to not eat fish in the same plate as meat. I see that in the chat. Part of that is the obvious reason, as I said, because the fish taste is going to ruin the meat, right? But the other reason, the law committee passed a responsum saying that you can eat it on the same plate. And they found that in the medieval sources, the reason why it said to eat fish separately, which is, we all know, because, you know, those of us who grew up in Jewish homes, the gefilte fish is served first, and then the plates are completely cleared until the meat's put on it. Why? You'll never guess why. The commentaries say there was a concern, this is top science of the 14th century, that that fish and meat consumed together can cause male impotence. God forbid. So for this reason, that is why the custom, besides the fact that fish ruins the taste of the meat. Okay, we talked about supervision. So I'll just end with a joke. There's a story that the president of the shul is, the rabbi is walking home, you know, on a Friday night, and he passes by a restaurant, and he looks in the window of the restaurant, and he sees the president of the shul having dinner, and he's got in the first course is lobster, and then shrimp, and then the bacon, and then cheese and meat, and everything you could possibly think is eating at this meal. So the rabbi then he can't get it past him, so he goes to the president. He says, "Look, I mean, you know, you're the president, but still, I mean, it's Shabbos, and you're the president of the shul, and he ate this and this and this and this, and I don't understand." And the president says, "But Rabbi, I don't understand. It was obviously under rabbinic supervision." That's my joke.
And on that, thank you so
I
much, Rabbi. This was
We
really
want
great.
to end with the Rabbanan Kaddish. Is that, do you do that?
Yes,
right?
I'm going to do the Debbie Friedman version, but just a quick before everybody signs off. Next month, and now you have a nice long break because next class isn't until April 29th, I think it is, and we're going to be talking about Shabbat. So the homework for that is chapter 11 back in the Reuven Hammer book. It's about 60 pages, so take it slowly. You'll have a long time to read it. So that's for next time. And also in the email message I sent out, I was asking whether we could move the class a half an hour earlier and then finish a half an hour earlier, but we won't do it if it doesn't work for some people because, you know, other people. So just let me know if it will work for you, right? As this in Pesach to everyone. And let me go ahead and share screen. Each month I'm getting a little bit better at how to work out the song here. So let's try this. Share the sound. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you,
That's a
Julia.
cough, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Bye.
Rabbi. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Julia and
Thank you very
Ellen,
much.
thank you.
Rabbi.
Zis
Good night.
Pesach, everybody.
Yes,
Everybody
good
have
Pesach.
happy Pesach and maybe
Happy
see you on the
Pesach.
home.
Good.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. This is
Lila Tov.
wonderful.
Bye, everyone.
That
Erev
too.
Tov.
Lila Tov.
Lila Tov, Zis and Pesach.
Yes.
Good
Good
health to all.
Shalom, Lila Tov, the whole thing.
Thanks again.
Rabbi, thank you.
Pleasure. My pleasure.
It really was Wonderful.